Thanks for joining me. This lab session is entitled JMeter Test for the Google website. We will now look into what does it take to define and execute a simple test plan. The Google website can be used to test a single user test. I do not recommend using this application site for more than one user testing. The site already handles many users all day long. A multiple user test from JMeter might add enough traffic to disable or disrupt customer expected response time. Always be mindful of performance testing on production websites. This is not good practice. A minimal test will consist of the test plan, a thread group, and one or more samplers or controllers. Let us see what that looks like. Objective 1. Launching JMeter. Let's start with launching JMeter. It can be done in two ways. One is to go to the Windows Explorer and locate the bin directory for JMeter, and then locate jmeter.bat, double-click on that file, and the launch will occur. Let's do that. Wait a few seconds. It came up on the other screen, and here we are. So here we have the JMeter IDE open as a result of double-clicking on jmeter.bat. All right, let's close that and look at the other approach. The other approach has to do with using a shortcut. So we can take that same file, right-click, and create shortcut. We put it on the desktop like this. Look at the properties, and you can see that it's pointing to the bin directory, jmeter.bat, and using a start-in directory as well. Once that's created, we can, again, double-click on the shortcut. Wait a few seconds. And here we are. We now have the same JMeter IDE launched from a shortcut. And here is Objective 2, Build Simple Test Plan. The objective of this portion of the lab is to build a simple test plan. Before I do that, I just want to remind you of a few buttons on the icon bar, as well as point out a couple of new ones that I have not mentioned. Let's start with, first, the Start button. This one starts a script that you have and runs to the end. The second button will start but not execute any timers that you may have inserted within your test script. When you start, these two buttons are activated, and they are your stop buttons. The first one stops immediately. The first one stops gradually, and the second one stops immediately. Then the next two buttons have to do with cleanup. If you have any output listener elements, then it stores data in them for output purposes, for results, viewing, and so on. And you can open one of those elements or select one of those elements and then just clear out the output in it. Otherwise, you can clear out all listeners with this button. So you have a single clear and a clear all. Then we have selection buttons. I won't go into this much further at the moment. At the end, we have a plugins button that will get you to the plugins manager. Over at the front, we're going to use this button to select a template. That being said, let's start with the test plan. You see that one that automatically gets populated, and it has some settings. We can give it a name or leave it as is, or we can suggest that we want to run thread groups consecutively instead of in a parallel mode, or we may want to make available the teardown thread group we talked about to run when as the last step within a performance test script execution. And that's enough information there. Of course, if we want to add any global variables, we can do that there using the add and add from clipboard buttons. We'll talk about that later. Let's go ahead and right-click on the test plan, and we're going to add a thread group. We just want a simple thread group. There are other selections that we can make use of, but we want this one. With that thread group, now you see it has been placed subordinate to the test plan. So everything underneath that will be a part of the test plan. The thread group, we can give it a name if we want or leave it as is. I'm going to choose to leave it as is. We can select a different option for what action to take after the sample error has occurred. If there's an error condition that occurs, what do we want to do? Do we want to continue? Do we want to stop the thread, stop the test, or stop the test now? So there are options that we can specify other than the default, which is continue. The default also is to run one user, ramp up in 1 second, and loop 1 time. We have the option to loop forever, or we have the option of, those are the two options, to loop forever or to loop based on a count, 1 time or multiple times. We have the ability to set up scheduler. I'm not going to talk about that in more detail just yet. Just want to mention that part is available to set a duration for the test. And we can also delay the thread creation until it's needed. That would be in the case of, say, a teardown. Okay, let's do the next thing. We need another element. We want to add a sampler, and the sampler we want is the HTTP request. This would be for web testing. We can again give it a name or leave it as is. We want the protocol will be HTTP. The server name in our case will be Google. .com. We don't have a port to specify. We'll go with the get. We don't have any further path detail to enter. And so we're ready with that one. The last thing I want to do is go back to the thread group and do an add for a listener. So we go all the way down to the bottom here, and the listener I want is the first one on the list, view results tree. This will allow you and I to see what's going to happen, what actually gets executed, and actually it's going to be this HTTP request. We only have a single one trying to get to the Google site. And there's nothing that we need to add. If we wanted to output this, instead of just seeing that output here, and we wanted to output it to an external file, we can do so by specifying the name of a file. We can locate one that exists, or we can let it create a brand new one. There's one other thing over here, log displays only on errors or successes, so we can control the output and what happens there. All right, here we are where we now have basically a script. The test plan includes a thread group, an HTTP request, and a listener output. Let's run that. You'll see it says you should save your test plan before running it. If you are using supporting data files, then it is particularly important to first save your test script. Do you want to save your test plan first? We're going to say no. And there we are. It's done. We see the green bars, icon bars back, and not the red. So we don't have to stop it. It's already stopped. And it ran, and we can expand on this and see that there were 2 requests made. We start with the first request. We see that it ran successfully. According to this, response code was 200. And we have some other statistical information, latency, load time, connect time. So we have some performance information already, just that quick. Then we can see the request in more detail. What was sent? HTTP, google.com. We can see the response data, what came back from issuing that request. And there's quite a bit of response body data as well as header data. There might be some information that's important to us. We could go through that, peruse through that data. But then in this case, all we wanted to do was to create a simple test plan, and we did that. This one strictly went to the website and got a page, and it was done. If we look, we can go into more detail looking at each one of the request responses that came back. But this is all we wanted to do. You saw that a test plan element is automatically displayed when the tool launches, and it is simple enough to insert at least 2 more elements, a thread group and an HTTP request sampler. That is fine, but there is another way by starting out with a template. The template icon, or the File Templates selection, launches the template option, which displays all that you need to create the right element group. You have several selections from the template list. Select the one that most closely represents your need by clicking the Create button. Takes a little time to get used to that, but once you have utilized several of them, you know which ones you want to use more often than others. And then remove extraneous entries. This is a nice time saver. In this objective, we cover using a template. We tested a script against Google, creating it manually. This time we want to create the similar script but using a template. So we can do that in one of two ways. Either we select this icon or we go to File and select Templates. I'm going to do that, and it gives us a pop-up that shows us a list of available templates that can be used to build a script. I'm going to use one, Web Test Plan. Select that and then Create. Now we have a template script, and we can take a look at the details, start from the top, and see if it's something we need, want, or don't want, or need to change. All right, since this time it gives a name, let's just change that first part to Google. That identifies the test plan that we want. We don't see any other checkboxes checked or anything else. We go to the next one. This time it's the thread group. It's identified now with a name, Scenario 1. We'll leave that as is, but we want one thread and one ramp up second. We don't want forever, so we'll put in 1 like we had before. We don't need the scheduler. We're going to run that simple script. So those are cleared. Let's go to the next one. This one is a request default. We hadn't used that before. But basically, you can identify, and we're going to change this URL here. You can identify what is the default URL that you want to use in a script, and that can be utilized in other HTTP requests. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to type in google.com here. We'll talk about this a little bit more. There's a cookie manager. It's set to its defaults. We'll leave that as is. You should have at least a cookie manager and a header manager defined in your scripts. And so here we are. We're doing a web test script, and that was part of the template. The header, it's set to its default. We don't need to change it. Then there's one called homepage. This is actually the HTTP request. We could have put google.com there in the server name or IP parameter, but since we put it in HTTP request default, then it's going to use that value here. We don't have to specify it again. If I had multiple HTTP requests, I could have all of them use that default if that is the correct URL. Then you can change the path to be more specific for a given URL. We have a think time, and that's set for 1 second. That's okay. That's good. We have a page returning. This was for the other site. We're not going to use that, so I'm going to right click and go down to an option called Disable. It doesn't remove it, it just disables it from actually being executed when we run the script. So far that's the only one we have disabled. And then we have the view results like you saw before. No need to change anything there. But I want to go back to the first one that shows that there's something else underneath this. I'm going to expand that one, expand this one, and expand this one. So we see there's an assertion under the home page. And what it's wanting to do is look for some particular value. So we have two choices that we could make. One is disable this assertion. The second one is specify some other value. What I'm going to specify is the title. The title should be Google, and let me close that. Okay, so that should exist in the page body that gets returned when we get to the site. So if that is correct, then this assertion is going to be good. Otherwise, it will create an error condition. Now, we don't need to do anything with this. This is the setting for the 1 second. And this assertion, looking for a 404, but because we have the high level disabled, then neither one of these elements will process. So we're good there. All right, so I believe we're ready to run. And we can point to the output area so that we can see it when it runs. And we're ready to click the start button. Notice we got the message, and we can go into saving it before we actually run. And there's also a setting that we could change to say that it should do it automatically. Do we want to save the test plan? Yes, let's do that. And let's call it Google 1. That's good. And it ran that quick. Sorry you didn't get to see the change from the green buttons to the red buttons and then back to the green buttons. And so here we have home. We can expand that and we see 3 responses back. On the initial request, we can see some statistics like we saw before. And on the response data, that's all of it, all these pulled together. We can look at them individually. And I can format this. And now there's that statement I was looking for. Title, Google, title. And we didn't get an error message, so it was able to find that. So that's an assertion, or the use of an assertion element to find information that can tell us we got a good response or not. And of course, we do see that in the result itself, the response code was 200. So we could test for that as well. We didn't have to test for text, but you have different options that you can do. So we did do this simple test. We created it using a template, and it's now reusable. My time has ended for this session. I thank you for yours. Join me in the next video.